Hey YouTube, so this is a cut down version of the full 40-minute long breakdown of the first movement of my symphony, Theseus and the Minotaur, which is over on Patreon. If you're a score level member, you get access to the study score version of this piece, so you can follow along on your own device, so you can see for yourself how I did things, what I did. You can go check that out. Both sketch and score levels will be able to see the full breakdown, but only score level members get access to the study score. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I've got the full symphony, Theseus and the Minotaur, here on my iPad, which you can see on the screen now. And if you don't know, the story to this is I was commissioned to write this piece by my friend Jordan Holloway, who runs the Dad Village Symphony Orchestra, which is a virtual orchestra. He asked me to write a 20-minute long symphony, and this is what I came up with. If you want to watch the entire concert, there's a few pieces in there. You can check it out on his channel. Or if you want to just see the symphony by itself, you can see that on my channel. Okay, so let's talk about the orchestra that I selected. I'm using a typical large orchestra, so that means triple woodwinds with flute 2 doubling the alto flute and flute 3 doubling the piccolo, 2 oboes and a cor anglais, 2 clarinets and a bass clarinet, 2 bassoons and a contrabassoon. So in essence, it's the 2 woodwind instruments and their auxiliary instrument, with the exception of the flutes. The brass is a typical brass section, so 4 horns, 3 trumpets, 2 trombones, 1 bass trombone and 1 tuba. That's pretty stock. 1 timpanist, and then 3 percussionists, a celeste player doubling on the piano instead of a piano player doubling on the celeste, harp, and then a string section. Aesthetically, I wanted this to be like the opening to an epic film from the 1950s or the 1960s. And so this begins with a fanfare. And this, the first movement, is for Theseus. So the opening fanfare is his theme, and we hear variations of his theme throughout the symphony, but this is it in its grandest form. So let me play you a bit of the recording. Now we start with these really high string tremolos, and then that's supported by the triangle here with the woodwinds playing really high up. The strings are doing a tremolo, so it's just repetitions on the same note, and the woodwinds are doing a trill for a little more like vibration there. So Theseus' theme is very consonant, so it's very big on the fifths and the fourths, and we have all the brass sort of doing that before we get into the actual melody. So we have horns 1 and 2 playing the melody here, while 3 and 4 are support. Then we have trumpet 1 playing the melody, with trumpet 2 being support and trumpet 3 down here being also support. Trombone 1 playing melody, with the rest of the trombones playing support, with tuba. And while that's going on, the harmony sort of does this. But with all of the rhythmic stuff. Dun, 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 dun. So it's a very fanfare. Now the same woodwinds that were playing in the beginning, they have these runs which to me add a bit of sparkle. Now the strings, and I debated myself with this at the time, and I still debate myself with how I should have treated the strings in this case, because the brass doesn't need the help. If all the brass is playing, they're plenty loud enough to be able to support themselves in relation to if the woodwinds and the strings are playing the same thing. In this case though, I had the strings add on top of the melody, I suppose, for a little bit of the string sound. However, I could have given the strings the exact same thing that I gave the woodwinds, the runs, and it would have been well balanced. And in fact, I probably should have done that, because the woodwinds themselves might not be loud enough to cut through while the brass is sustaining those notes. And then a note about how I went through this with my teacher. When I showed him the first draft of this fanfare, he gave me a lesson that I just wasn't considering. So my problem was I was being very amateur with how I was writing all the lines. So it turned out that the melody and the bass line were doing this. So I don't know if you can tell, but they're just playing the same note, just a couple octaves apart. And that's not very rich harmony. So the bass line and the melody should, in this context, have a little bit more of a harmony counterline thing going on between them. So what the melody and the bass line does is this. So it's much more rich even just by the melody and the bass line by itself. And then the harmony in between, I was trying my best to voice lead all of that to make it nice and smooth and comfortable. So that's a moment where I could feel my compositional technique improving as a part of writing this. So the next section, we go into a new theme, and it's played here in the strings. Let's listen to that section real quick. So that I determined was the theme for the Mediterranean, which is the sort of overall setting of our story. Now for a little sparkle, we have 2 triangle hits, 2 crotali hits, timpani, so a little percussion back here. There's like a call and answer in this space since there's nothing happening in those beats the timpani plays. And then we have some harmonics. If you're uncertain what that means, basically what this is telling the player to do is, if you see the regular note head, that's where the note is supposed to be depressed, so they're playing an E flat. And then the diamond note head is where their other finger should be lightly placed onto the fingerboard, not fully depressed but just lightly on there, and it'll create a note about 2 octaves higher. That's an E flat, even though the written E flat is here. But it gives it a sort of glassy tone rather than them playing this E flat just regularly. I didn't want that effect. I wanted like a glassy, airy sort of feel. And then the triangle and crotalis come back to support that. Now, in this next section, the main theme comes back without the triplets though. So at the beginning it went da 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 da. Here we have the same sort of idea, but no triplets. Actually, this is in a new key. This, by the way, is in the key of E. And the brass is playing mostly here. The key of E is an uncomfortable key for the brass to play in. And this was twofold. This was intentional, and also I couldn't find a way to avoid having the brass play in E. E is a fine key for the strings, so they're also playing. But the sharp, look at how many sharps are in the trumpet's key signature. That's a lot of sharps. So they have to depress a lot of keys, and it just doesn't sit well on the instruments themselves. The reason I couldn't avoid it is because any other direction for the harmony to come from here I didn't like, and so I didn't want to change the key signature for everything before it. I thought it did well going into the key of E. And then secondly, the way this first movement is structured is the beginning is a grand fanfare, and that's as big as it gets in the whole first movement. So as we get along, we get the sense that Theseus is losing his confidence a little bit. So things are starting to feel a little uneven. So if it helps add to that effect, this is an uncomfortable key for the brass, even though they're playing this in a way that doesn't feel like the very heralding, confident fanfare from the beginning, if that makes any sense. Let's listen to that. Then we get into this next section. Now this is more development. We have this figure repeating in the strings. Dun 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 dun. To me, this is sort of like we're about to set sail. So in the story, Theseus sails to the island where the Minotaur lives to go and defeat him. So we're starting to feel a little uneasy about the journey. And also, this is a sort of representation of what it feels like to sail across the ocean. So, snare drum is supporting that. Low brass here, or these trombones, are playing along, bum, 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 very lightly along with the strings. And then we have fragments of the theme coming back over and over and over again. First with a strong horn here, and then in a few woodwinds here, so clarinets, oboes, and flutes. So flutes are low, doubled by the oboe, which will be strong in that low of a range, and then clarinets, which will be very mellow in their shallow register there. And basically what I was just playing with was variations of the theme, how many colors I could get that didn't sound very heralding. This trumpet comes in with the same theme, but it's not playing solo, it's playing with oboe too. I did this specifically to mellow the sound of the trumpet. So instead of a trumpet just by itself sounding nice and bright, the oboe playing unison with it kind of dulls it a little bit. You might be able to hear a little bit of the oboe player if they're slightly out of time with each other, but if they were perfectly in time with each other, the oboe there, just the effect that it has, the reediness, and the slightly softer timbre where the trumpet is mellowing it. Same with the two horns here being doubled by the cor anglais, adding a little bit of reediness and mellowness. Oh, and then we have this figure that is introduced, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Harp starts playing in a rhythm that is super different to the rest of the ensemble, and it starts playing in triplets. At the same time, the bass clarinet is playing those same notes, and harp continues playing until the harp just wins out and the triplets continue. We are now pretty much arriving to the island. The type of harmony wasn't present at all in the first half of the movement, and we have this sort of repeating figure, like the undulating waves on the beach of this island. Then clarinets come in, and then after two bars of clarinets, the violins come in, and since the clarinets don't continue, what they do instead is sustain a chord with the bassoons, which in this case I chose because it's a very dark sonority compared to everything else. So it's very mellow and reedy almost. It sustains until we get into a new melody. So let's listen to these few measures between H and I. Clarinets. Violins. Can you hear that chord sustained by the clarinets? Then we get into the next thing. Now, this next section is the Mediterranean theme again. Softer, and it's, I think, verbatim. However, we now have this texture with harp and celeste playing in octaves. The soft, mellow pluckiness of the harp mixed with the soft bell-like quality of the celeste is really nice and twinkly. And this is an orchestration that's really prevalent in the second movement, which we're about to go into. So this is sort of like setting up for that. So that was a quick breakdown of how I put together the first movement to Theseus and the Minotaur, and what my thinking was for not only how to write the material just from scratch as I was trying to come up with it all, but also how I intentionally made orchestrational choices, what I might have done differently now if I were to write it again, what my frame of mind was, how I wanted the listener to feel as the movement progressed, thus the story progressing at the same time as well. So I hope you found that enjoyable. Ask any questions you want and I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. I'm gonna get the second part up soon, so I hope you enjoyed this and you stay tuned for more. So until next time, take care.